We're an online publication focused on sustainability and the triple bottom line, which is the intersection of the environment, economy, and society. So we write articles for a business audience about all sorts of topics that would fit that description. Energy happens to be a big one of those topics, particularly renewable energies such as solar, which is the subject of tonight's conversation. This event we call Stories and Beer. It's a monthly event that we hold sometimes here in Berkeley, but typically in San Francisco at the hub there. The purpose of the event is a very casual panel conversation. I'm not an expert. I get the conversation rolling by asking a couple kind of high-level questions to get these guys' juices flowing, and then it's really up to all of you to keep things moving. So start thinking of the kinds of questions that you want to ask these folks. And in about 10 or 15 minutes, it'll be in your hands. And finally, has anybody not been to the hub before? Okay. Amanda, you want to give us a little spiel? Because you can do it more justice than I. And by the way, we're broadcasting this as well. I have confirmation that at least 1 million, actually one person is watching. Somewhere between 1 and 1 million people are watching. So come stand here.
Oh, right. Last time I had to do this, it's really awkward.
Well, you can talk.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Impact Hub is the space that you're currently in, and we are a global membership community that's focused on supporting social enterprises, which means businesses that have an environmental or a social impact. We have office space that you can work in San Francisco and Oakland and over 60 places around the world. We do events in the evenings, and we're a global network of over 7,000 people. If you have any questions and want to learn more, definitely ask me. I'll be here all night. We'd love to offer everybody who's here a free day pass to come and use our space. So you'll get info about that via email. And thank you all for coming again.
You guys ready? All right. So without further ado, we've got 3 distinguished panelists with us tonight. We have Andreas Karelas. He's the executive director of a startup called Revolve. We're going to let you tell us what that's all about. Also, Jason Rissman, who's the managing director for Open IDEO. You might be familiar with IDEO. Open IDEO is an interesting part of IDEO, so we're going to have you tell us a little bit about that. And Brian Bishop, he's a senior program manager at PG&E, our big utility here in Northern California. So guys, let's just get it started with real brief, short and sweet, 2 minutes max. Tell us a little bit of who you are and why you're here, besides the fact that I asked you to.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, I'm here because I want to be, and I want to be here with all of you and having this conversation, because this is an exciting conversation to have right now. My background is in economics and sustainable development. Got into renewables about 10 years ago. Started working with a number of organizations, American Council on Renewable Energy, ACOR, worked with the National Audubon Society, a group called Blue Energy, Center for Resource Solutions, and now I've started Revolve in 2011, which is a nonprofit that has a revolving fund that finances solar energy projects for community centers. So I'll explain how that works a little bit more in detail, but that's the long and short of it.
And specifically community centers.
Specifically, yeah. So we only finance projects for nonprofit organizations or cooperatives that serve their community.
Jason?
Great. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Jason Rissman. I lead Open IDEO. I actually can't claim to be a renewable energy or solar expert, but don't worry, I'm not in the wrong place. Open IDEO is an open innovation platform and community. We enable people everywhere to participate in using design thinking, and collaboration to help address pressing global issues. We just ran a renewable energy challenge, and so I'm sort of like the student that just did a crash course, but I had the benefit of the teachers being our community members from around the world who submitted all sorts of research, almost 200 unique ideas, real innovative stuff, including one of our winners, Andreas, who participated in the challenge and came out as one of the top participants.
Which, funny enough, was sheer coincidence.
Was sheer coincidence. We recognized each other on the invitation. Yeah.
Good. So my name is Brian Bishop, and I work for PG&E, that utility you are all aware of. The new guy there. I've been just under 2 years. So I'm a Berkeley native, Berkeley High, UC Berkeley. did an MBA in geography, and then did an MBA with Jen Boynton at Presidio Graduate School. And it was her invitation that brought me here. I've been interested in renewable energy and environmental issues my whole life, from my father's early days in the Environmental Protection Agency back in the 70s to my brother's sustainable existence in his farm up in the mountains. I have been involved in the solar industry with an integrator and have solar on my roof, as is stated there. I'm very interested in solar. Currently, I run 2 programs at PG&E. One is the CSI thermal program, so incenting projects that offset natural gas, and the other program I run is the self-generation incentive program, which is incentives for wind, advanced energy storage, fuel cells, and other technologies at PG&E.
Fantastic. Right, guys. So we're here to talk about solar, and so I just thought I'd ask some high-level questions to kind of get things going. We all know solar is a great thing. It's a good idea. It's clean energy, that sort of thing. What's the status of solar today? It's still not a huge piece of our energy mix. I mean, it's less than 1% still. What's the progress to date, and give us a little sort of, where are we now from your perspective?
So at PG&E, we have installed interconnected a lot of projects, approximately 150,000 interconnections in PG&E territory so far, and in 2015 we expect to interconnect another 70,000. So just in 2015, we're going to interconnect almost half as many as we've interconnected to date. So it's growing. These are
in 1 year. That's basically
in
50%.
1 year, 70,000. That's the projection. It's not an official number, but that's what we're looking at. So it's very successful. That said, in 2013, the incentives expired. So the California Solar Initiative had incentives for residential and commercial projects, and they expired in 2013. So there are no more CSI incentives. By the time they expired, they were so small, they weren't really affecting project economics much. So really, you can do a project very easily without an incentive.
So despite that, you're still looking at that 50% again growth.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah. Despite
Excellent.
that, right?
How about you guys? The pulse of solar. Got a perspective?
So yeah, my understanding, kind of already disclaimed that I'm not an expert.
But you guys did this. Maybe tell us a little bit about some of the ideas that came through the platform.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, my observation is that it's an industry that is ripe to take off. Right? Is that the price of solar seems to have fallen 80 to 90% since 2008. The projections are that, at least in the United States, we'll reach grid parity in terms of the price of solar being as cheap as grid electricity. The projections that within a couple of years, parity will be reached for 47 states. So the technology is here, the economics are here, but it's sort of an early stage of a functioning ecosystem where the missing pieces are, policy is advancing, but it's getting there. The community organizing, the awareness, the financing, these are some of the pieces that are still being developed. And through the challenge, those are the pieces that we saw people really rally around, is how can communities be supporting each other, supporting others to be able to either learn about solar, pay for solar, or just make it happen.
And I did a little numbers research before I came so that I could share some exciting statistics, because you hear them all the time. They're so mind-blowing, really, about how fast the industry is growing. And these guys just mentioned a couple of them, so I'm going to rattle off a couple more, and so hopefully you guys can go rattle these off at the water cooler. So as Brian mentioned, in California in 2013, up until 2013, there was a gigawatt of solar installed in the state of California. In 2013, we added another gigawatt. We doubled the entire industry that had taken 30 years to build in 1 year. The question, like Deutsche Bank came out with a report that said that actually, and I've seen a couple different iterations of it, but some headlines say that by the end of 2016, that all 50 states will have grid parity, meaning that solar will be just as cheap or cheaper than the utility.
And that's without incentives.
Or it might be with incentives, but it's essentially just saying that by the end of next year, anyone in America can go solar, and it'll save them money. Long-term projections, the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, international, whatever it is, the EIA, has said that there will be the majority of energy, that over 50% of the world's energy will be solar PV by 2050, right? So that by 2050, solar has won, game over. So there's sort of this, okay, what happens in between there? And Mark Jacobson, who's a professor at Stanford, has done a lot of research as to how will we get to 100% renewable energy here in the United States. And his research shows that looking at the technology and the financing, that we should get to 100% renewable energy in the United States by 2030. But that when you look at the cultural and the political hurdles, that we're probably not going to get there to 2050. So that to me is that's the gap, right? Is how do we close that gap? How do we make it so that we can get that a lot sooner? One other statistics I'll throw out, and many of you may have heard this, is when Obama gave his State of the Union, he pointed out that we are now in 2015, we are installing solar so fast that in a 3-week period, we've installed as much solar as we did in 2008. In 2008, we were installing a lot of solar. So that's just to show you how fast this is really taking off.
That's great. And now it sounds to me like you've all mentioned that, it's the ever falling cost and the technology that's driving a lot of this, but clearly there's more to it. You just mentioned political and cultural aspects of this. You guys kind of started talking about this a little bit, but I'm curious if you could each tell me a little bit more about your respective organizations and how what you are doing is driving this. And I know that's slightly abstract for Open IDEO, but just to tell us a little bit more about what's going on, and it would be particularly interesting to hear from you, Brian.
Well, there's just lots of things to say. I don't know. Well, I'll start with, okay, it's really cool and sexy to talk about solar, but I should say, as a utility guy, we should be focusing first on energy efficiency. Not as cool, not as sexy, but energy efficiency, top of the loading order in California. That's where the most cost-effective reductions in GHGs are to be found. So solar's cool. I love it, obviously, but if you really want to focus your money somewhere, it should be on energy efficiency. The best payback is there, and the biggest impact on GHGs is there. Then next down would be demand response conservation, and third it would be renewable energy. So just to get the loading order right. But why would PG&E want to promote energy efficiency? You guys have hopefully heard of decoupling, and our allowed profits.
Has anyone not heard of that? It's pretty cool. You want to give us the layman's terms? Yeah. So the allowed profits to the utility by the PUC are separate from how much energy is sold. So the Public Utilities Commission, CPUC, Commission, Energy Bid, California Public Utilities Commission, they regulate utilities. They allow the utility an interest rate and a revenue requirement every year. The allowed profits are completely separate from how much energy the utility sells. It's called decoupling. So the utility has no incentive to increase consumption because they don't make more money. Whereas in the olden days, that's what all that matters.
Correct.
Use more electricity, we make more money.
And on the flip side, utility has no incentive to oppose solar because we don't lose any money when people go solar. That's a big misconception. I want to get that out there too, because a lot of people think, oh, the utility's a roadblock. They don't want you to go solar. Well, it's pass-through cost. The energy that the utility procures is passed through. They don't make any more money. There's no additional fee tied to that. So it's a pass-through cost. So the utility's agnostic. So want to get that out there in terms of policy, because I think that's a big misconception about the utility's perspective on energy efficiency, but also on how things work out financially, the business model.
So on our side, in terms of using Open IDEO and design and open innovation challenges, as I mentioned, we just ran a 12-week open innovation challenge focused on, the question was how many communities support the rapid transition to renewable energy. And we were really excited by the response. We see that it's catalyzed new conversations, new efforts, new collaborations, and definitely a lot of learning. Including for us, we've learned a lot about the topic, and I think that it's only bolstered our enthusiasm for working in the space, and hope that it's really the first of a series of challenges and a series of design engagements that we can do focused on supporting new innovation for addressing climate and sustainability. And so we're actively exploring how can we do more challenges, what are the right questions, how can we engage our community of social entrepreneurs, designers, innovators to be able to really stimulate more thinking, get more ideas off the ground, and really support more innovation that can happen from the ground up.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on that. As I mentioned, we participated in the challenge, and I think as I mentioned, to me it's this gap of how do we get it from rather than happening in 2050 to get 100% in 2030, and that, as I mentioned, it's a culture gap, and it's about moving the social side of things. And I think what OpenIDEO was doing through that renewable energy challenge is getting all these people to really think about this question: how do we make it happen on the community level, and getting all these creative ideas. And that's really what we need is creative ideas to come out and think about these challenges, think about them in creative ways. So to me, it was a really rewarding experience to be a part of that, and to see all these other ideas, and wow, that was some of the ideas are really, really creative, and that's what needs to happen now. Is we're not going to solve climate change with business as usual. We need to come up with creative solutions, financing and community and otherwise, and that was one of the great things that came out of that. But so I'll briefly tell you about Revolve. So Revolve is a nonprofit organization, and we're based in San Francisco. And as I mentioned, we were founded in 2011. And we were founded on this concept that, a couple of years ago, there was a big sort of engagement on climate change on a national level. You had grassroots climate organizations that were marching in the streets, that were petitioning politicians. And there was this sense that, Obama was elected, and we were leading up to Copenhagen, and there was going to be a bill in Congress, and it was this very exciting moment in the movement where we thought, this is actually going to happen. We're going to pass federal legislation, we're going to sign an international accord, and climate change will be fixed. And and as many of us know, that didn't happen, right? Those things all sort of fell apart, and those of us that were sort of engaged in that, there was this huge letdown. There was this feeling that we did what we were supposed to do to try to make change, and those things didn't work. And so to me, it was this question of, okay, how can we use this body of energy, this body of people that really want to make a change happen, and how do we use that action potential in a way that's actually going to deploy renewable energy, which is what we need. And so we came up with this idea for Revolve, which essentially allows individuals to donate a couple dollars, whatever they can give through crowdfunding, into a pool of money that we call the Solar Seed Fund. And that Solar Seed Fund is a revolving fund that finances solar energy projects for community centers. So nonprofit organizations and cooperatives that serve their community, which are typically too small and too complicated for a number of reasons for typical solar finance companies to work with. We specifically focus on these projects. And we go in, we finance a project, they save money, and they pay us back over 20 years through a solar lease agreement. And we take the money that comes out of that, which includes interest, and we reinvest it into future projects. So each project pays for future projects. So it's a pay it forward model for solar energy in the community. So that's the model. We just, Thursday of last week, we just finished our third crowdfunding campaign, and we raised $50,000. It's going to be a solar installation for the Other Avenues Worker-Owned Cooperative, which is a grocery store in San Francisco. So that'll be our third project to date. Altogether, our three projects will amount for 70 kilowatts of installed capacity, and we've empowered over 800 people to donate to the crowdfunding, to the Solar Seed Fund. And those people, this is where it's most interesting for me, is those people come from 38 states in the country and from 22 countries around the world. So we've been able to put that out there through our crowdfunding, and we've realized that there's actually a really strong demand from people around the world that want to see a revolving fund for solar in the community get off the ground.
That's really cool. Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, I just want to say that's really super innovative and interesting, and I love that kind of thinking. I wanted to add a couple things. I didn't mention when you asked, what is the utility doing? We obviously promote and provide lots of programs, right? So educational programs. reduce the barriers, and increase confidence in renewable energy. So there's the thermal program I mentioned, the CSI program. There's lots of educational programs we put out there, but this financing concept is really, I've found that with the utility, that's a tough nut to crack. But if you can resolve the problem with that upfront cost, which you're working on, that can really move the needle. So yeah, and those are the kinds of things that the utility likes to talk about. So I go around and I talk about thermal and whatever I talk about, and those innovative financing models are always something that people want to learn about. So it's really cool. There's a good way to work together.
Excellent.
So I got about 22 more questions, but I'm just going to hold it to one quick one because I want you guys to have your chance. So get your questions ready. It's about what you just said, and it's about that working together. And we have a bunch of different pieces to the puzzle here. We've got these innovative financing models. We got this sort of crowdsourced, let's get ideas on the table. We've got this thing called community, which is this vague thing. And we've got the utility, like old school, like we make power. How are you guys working together? We're not necessarily the three of you, but with those different entities or others that I didn't think of. What's the cross-sector collaboration that goes on? I mean, you guys have some relationship with the utility if you're buying solar, right?
Yeah. So our installer, signs up to have interconnection done.
I probably work with your installer. Right. We work with installers extensively. I'm always talking to installers. We have installer workshops. We talk to them about our programs, how to play with our programs, how to get incentive money, and what are the rules, and what kind of incentives exist. We do a lot of outreach, and I think the installers that work with us really appreciate that. We offer lots of classes at the Pacific Energy Center that are free. We just hosted a storage class today, free. We got like a whole bunch of people in the room. Really,
who comes to that?
Just today in class, there were some people from the CPUC. There were people from utilities, students, industry people, inverter manufacturers, solar installers. There are lots of people across the board. Storage is obviously top interest for a lot of people. But the utility has really tried to engage with the contracting community and try to provide the tools, information, education, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions. And I'll throw a bone to our interconnection group. Our interconnection group has just worked tirelessly to increase the speed of interconnections. So when contractors are frustrated, we're trying to address that to get things online faster. There's a lot of things that we're doing across the board to try to make solar go faster for people.
Who's got a question?
So I'm really intrigued about PG&E's role. You mentioned there's no disincentives to promote solar. Are there any incentives, either external or internal to PG&E itself and its longevity?
Well, I think there are. The utility receives incentives when certain goals are reached, especially in energy efficiency, but we do receive incentives for our renewable energy programs. I can't talk extensively about how those incentives from the commission play out, but there are those incentives, but it's customer service is, I think, a primary thing that we want to be able to facilitate people if they want to install solar and to make that interconnection happen seamlessly and, in an advantageous way for the customer. I mean, it's customer service is a huge thing. And so we're devoting lots of programs right now in my distributed generation group that are customer facing, customer focused, improve the bill so people, when they get interconnected, they can understand what is this net energy, what is this true up, what does it mean? We're trying to provide all that information so people can get over that hurdle of knowledge. Those are the main incentives. I mean, there's not a lot of financial, again, it's the pass-through cost. So we buy a kilowatt, we sell it for the exact same price.
I get that's where I'm going. Yeah. Is there any kind of meta incentives here that lead PG&E to look to the horizon and say, this is where the money is, this is where our future is, versus just serving essentially as a broker for different online energy sources that come?
Yeah, that's a bigger business model question that I'm probably qualified to answer. I do know we've invested in solar and tried to own solar, and I think the decision at the top was that it's not the best model for utility to own. it's the PPA model would be better. Leaving, you get criticized for everything you do, right? So if you own solar, then you're the bad guy for owning the solar, and it's the contracting community that loses out. But I think the contracting community is probably better equipped to do that, more efficient, lower cost. So, I don't think that's in the horizon, but I think the customer service aspect is the biggest incentive right now.
I'll just piggyback on that and correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I think one of the bigger drivers in California is the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard. So right now, all the investor-owned utilities have to meet is it 33% of their load has to be served with renewable energy by 2020, and actually Governor Brown is talking about moving that up to 50%. I think there is a larger sort of policy incentive. That's what's been driving the industry for a long time is the RPS. And then I don't know where sort of things are in the works on this, but there's also this, I think it's public enough knowledge if I know about it, but PG&E's sort of community solar program.
Yeah, the green option.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I think that's another way.
I'm going to forget lots of things tonight, but the green option's cool because the utility is procuring 270 megawatts of solar that's not part of the RPS. By the way, that RPS is not megawatts that the utility owns. Right, it's interconnections that count towards the RPS. In any case, they're going to procure 270 megawatts of solar so that people, if they want to, can take part in this green option. You can look it up on our website. And that way, for those who don't have a roof or their shade or whatever reason, they can invest and they can buy solar power that way. They don't get NEM credits for overproduction, but you do have an option to go solar. Right now, I believe there's, a 2-cent premium. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's a little bit more expensive. But as solar goes down, if you're in that program, you can actually be positive, assuming the costs continue to go down. So it's a pretty cool program, the green option. Molly Hoyt runs that program.
What's a NEM credit?
Say it again.
What's a NEM credit?
Net energy metering credit. So for overgeneration, the customer receives full retail credit for that, for any kilowatt hours they put back onto the grid over and above their use.
Sorry for perhaps piling on, but I come from Marin County where we implemented the first ever community choice aggregation system, which is now called Marin Clean Energy. And it was frankly after years of fighting against PG&E, who tried to stop that in its tracks. And now PG&E is leading the charge to stop San Francisco and the East Bay from setting up their own community power agency. And I guess the question is, why can't you get on board with community choice? The second question is feed-in tariffs. We have a feed-in tariff in Marin at Marin Clean Energy, which allows anyone who produces more power than they consume to sell it back to the utility at a tariff rate. Unfortunately, that rate is not enough to incentivize businesses. And my interest would be to see businesses build, for example, canopies over parking lots. Every shopping mall ought to be covered, their parking lots and their roofs, with solar. It's a no-brainer. But they can't pay enough to make it an incentive, and PG&E undercuts them by a few cents every time they try to do one of these tariffs.
So yeah, look at me. Well, as the mastermind against Marine Clean Energy.
I'm
it's
sorry.
really easy
that
to
was before your time.
Yeah, it's very easy to criticize utility. It's commonplace. I'm used to it, and whatever. But all I'll say is that it's usually more nuanced than the big bad utility. If you probably break it out to costs, source of energy, some of the other issues, and I'm not aware of. I mean, the MCE came before me, and the battle that you're talking about, I'm willing to bet, because I know a lot of people, I'm willing to bet there were some very valid arguments on both sides of the fence. It usually goes that way. And I bet you can answer your own question if you go back to the record and review the documents from the CPUC. There were a lot of filings, and I bet if you went back there, you could see the valid arguments on both sides. I mean, the decisions obviously are made by the commission, and they are what they are. I have no role in that. I really am not the one to speak about about the battle you're talking about with San Francisco. I'm not involved with that. I really can't comment, but it's usually more nuanced than just the big bad utility fighting clean energy. It's an easy place to go in your mind when you think about renewable energy, but I would suggest questioning that.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing about some of the better ideas that came out of IDEO's search for ideas that relate to solar and other renewables.
Great.
Besides Revolve, what?
Yeah, so first of all, please check out the platform. It's Open Ideas. You can see all
.org,
of
right?
.com.
.com, sorry.
OpenIdeo.com. And you can check out, so we had almost 200 ideas submitted. 8 were chosen as the top ideas. There were 20 some that were in the short list. They came from participants from all over the world. We had people visit the challenge from about 200 countries. So it was totally a global challenge. The activity of having to force ourselves to pick the top ideas was really based upon our own criteria and those of our sponsor. And it's to say that there's a lot of worthwhile ideas that are in the larger body and that you might not see in the later stages. So some of the top ideas that we were most excited about at the end, there's definitely themes around financing, right? It's trying to find new models to help more people afford solar. And so Andreas's idea was one of those. There's another one that's more like a Kiva for solar. We also wanted to highlight other types of renewable energy. And so there was one that was focused on using cow manure for pasteurization technology. So that was the cow poop idea, which is always fun to talk about because based upon a group of Stanford students. And actually, there was someone here in the audience that worked on the idea of an event recently. Introduce themselves. There's also a really innovative idea around using basically moving brackets to that would be powered by solar and be able to direct the solar panel and also in the process create clean water. So sort of for a developing world context to be able to off-grid use solar as a way to get power but also to get clean water. So just a few of the top ideas that are worth checking out. But it brings to mind just the question of, it seems that one of the things that we learned from the challenge is that one of the greatest latent energy sources is just that of the will and the interest and the innovation of people, right? Is that if you look at something like the climate march, was it some 400,000 people in the streets of New York, and I believe hundreds of thousands elsewhere around the world too. It's an issue that people care about, and I really throw out the question to everyone: what are the ways that people can get involved, and where is their attention most needed right now? Our model is social entrepreneurship, is design, is try to create new innovative models to address really big problems. But I'm curious, what does the group think of different ways for people to be helping the most?
Ideas, questions? We'll go with you and then back.
So as I'm sort of sitting in this room and looking at this panel, I don't be offended, but have a question around diversity.
We almost always have at least one woman on the panel. I know this is our dominant white male panel here, but
Yes.
anyway,
But as
acknowledged.
sort of a bigger question too about just, I think, in the construction industry and maybe some of the connected industries, I think they are fairly male dominant, and I just wonder what barriers that maybe has to adoption and the ways that people perceive the solar industry, and if that's something you talk about in your organizations or ways that you're seeing those walls, sort of that diversity being increased.
I'll just throw out that last night in San Francisco there was a women in solar energy talk, and I saw photos and it was totally packed. And it was all women that work in the solar industry, and the people talking were all women that are leading in the solar industry. So I think there's definitely this need in the industry, and that there are organizations that are working to try to build in more diversity. But yeah, no, it's a huge issue.
But I mean, I think it's beyond the gender equity issue too, right? Is for sure is we see this as one of the emerging areas of the future of the economy, and access to participating in the economic opportunity and the equity of that is something that I know some groups are working on. It's a topic that people talk about, but it's a challenge and it's important. It's a real issue.
Utility, we have, I mean, my boss is one, I would say that there's a very interesting mix of people at the utility. Just speak about the utility. It's a really interesting group that we have, people from other countries. And I think that in terms of gender diversity, it's really exciting to see in the traditional energy industry, you know. And I believe there are more women-owned businesses partaking in these programs than ever, but I don't have a number for you, but that's my understanding. So that's
anecdotal. I can tell you from the challenge, we saw really strong participation by women. Sure.
Yeah, I think the racial and ethnic piece is as important as the gender piece for sure.
Well, yeah, just to build on that before I get to my idea, communities of color in the state have 2% of the solar installations. And this is a significant problem. It's far beyond gender balance. And I want to put a plug for the work of SpunQ, Danny Kennedy, and Emily Kirsch, SFUNQ, an incubator explicitly for solar startups over in Oakland, 50-50 women versus men entrepreneurs, a number of entrepreneurs of color. But the idea is the biggest barrier institutionally is finance, unquestionably. And cities like Seattle began using social impact bonds in the late 1990s to finance solar. Social impact bonds deserve a much closer look. Richmond is using one in a very creative way to put an solar installation, in one of its most disadvantaged communities. So I encourage you to think about social impact bonds and their power to catalyze more investment in the solar equipment.
How is Seattle's bond done?
Pardon me?
How did Seattle's bond do?
Did well. They passed the first one in 1998, the same year that they adopted for the U.S.'s first municipal level sustainable development plan. And Seattle Power has been powered by solar impact bonds ever since. Richmond is the first mayor in the city to do it. It goes beyond community aggregated solar, which is a great idea, and Lynn County is to apply for that. But it really gives an opportunity for communities, disadvantaged communities, to participate. So it's working.
What do you guys think about that? I mean, it seems to me that that's related to what you're doing with the community centers. Yeah, I mean, presumably, is there a specific goal in terms of reaching low-income communities, or in terms of that finance puzzle?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the interesting thing is that within the solar financing world, there are a lot of solar leasing companies, solar financing companies that work with residential homes, and those are residential homes that have good credit ratings. And then you also have solar leasing companies, solar financing companies that will do big commercial projects. But that this market of community organizations that serve their community, whether it's a nonprofit or a co-op, that's there to provide a service to the community, that these are actually left out of the solar industry for the most part, that solar finance companies aren't working with them. So the way that we are serving underserved communities is by working with the community centers that serve those communities. So we're providing financing and allowing community centers to save money on their electric bill so that they can put that back into their programming, so that they can provide different services to the communities that they serve. And we definitely have so far we've done 3 projects all here in the Bay Area. But our focus is increasingly on finding communities that are even, again, at the end of the day, we're trying to provide financing for those communities that otherwise can't find it. And so increasingly that's going to be underserved communities, communities of color, low-income communities, for sure.
One of the things that I've been doing at PG&E is we've been offering essentially free residential solar thermal installations to disadvantaged communities that take part in a pilot we started with the Community Services and Development group. It's a state program, and so we've been working together. We use our incentive out of my program, and Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program LIHEAP money. So we've been doing a lot of outreach. Primarily, the contractors brought in by CSD, the Community Services Development Group in Sacramento. Contractors they've contracted go out and find people who are interested. They sign up, and what my incentive doesn't offset, they bring in the back end with LIHEAP money, so it's free. So we've built a couple hundred residential solar thermal installations for folks, primarily in the Central Valley, Fresno, Merced area where it's really needed. So we're pretty proud of that because we've been making a lot of progress.
If I could just,
Good.
sorry, I just want to
You
make
and then-
one more comment back to your question earlier, which I thought is sort of raises a kind of bigger question. And I just wanted to say something about it before we move, because these are all really good questions. But so you're right that there has been a significant backlash from utilities against community choice aggregation program. Most recently, it was through Bill AB 2145, which was very much about trying to gut community choice aggregation. And I don't mean to step on any toes, but this is sort of I also am on the steering committee of the local Clean Energy Alliance, and this is one of the issues that's pretty key to the organization. So the question of why are utilities threatened by CCA? And for those of you that aren't familiar with what CCA is, community choice aggregation is an opportunity for a community. So San Francisco, or Marin Clean Energy is the first one in the state. Marin, essentially the residents of Marin are collectively purchasing their power from independent power producers, which still goes through PG&E lines, but they get to pick where they procure their energy from, and it's a greener mix. And theoretically, over time, they could reinvest that money into their own community and build their own solar projects and lower the cost over time. So CCA is this actually awesome tool for communities around the country to increase their clean energy. And the utilities are threatened by it because it's taking away their customer base. For the first time ever, utilities that typically operate in a monopoly environment are now experiencing competition. And it's the same competition that they're also facing from solar installers to some degree. And I know that through decoupling and that it's not as cut and dry as I'm making it, but there is a real threat there. And I think what the bigger question here is not, okay, let's fight the utilities on these programs or these issues. I think the bigger question is what is the energy outlook of the future of the United States look like? And I think what we're going to see technologically is that it's going to be increasingly distributed generation, meaning more and more homes are going to be putting up solar on their roof, which means there's less of sort of big central power stations and big transmission lines going to community centers. But what you're going to see is that communities are generating their own energy, that you have solar on the roof, that you have electric vehicles, that you have energy efficiency, you have demand response, you have battery storage. I'm sure many of you saw Tesla just announced they're going to be putting out a home battery storage that's going to really revolutionize things. So what happens is that then you have these local grids that are generating their own power, and but still someone needs to run transmission lines, someone needs to run power lines. Who's the one that's going to balance that grid? And the question is sort of, where does the utility fit in when communities are increasingly generating their own power? And my personal opinion is that utilities are going to be there to make sure that it all runs and make sure that it's still working, and that there's that power has been able to transfer to each other through the smart grid and all this stuff. So I think this is a huge question that the utilities are questioning. It's typically dubbed the utility death spiral, where as more and more communities go, as more and more people go solar, and utilities have less of a customer base, they have to add those costs to a smaller group of customers, which then it makes solar even more attractive for those people, and so more and more people go solar, and so it puts the utilities in a tough position. Of course, we rely on the utilities. The utilities are the backbone of the electric grid, and so we need to figure out how to play well together, and what is a new business model for the utilities going forward. And this is a huge question that the country is wrestling with right now.
I love this. I don't want to go too far on a tangent. Brian, did you want to say something on that?
No.
There's
a lot to say. I mean, there's not a lot. Yeah, I wouldn't agree on some of those points.
Yeah,
there's a lot to say.
Good. But that's interesting stuff to go home and ponder. Let's go with you, and then I think Tina had a question, and then you'll be.
Sorry, Brian. The investment tax credit is due to drop, I think, at the end of the year from 30% to 10%. I'm just curious if you guys have any comment on how that might affect growth in the solar industry.
I've got some. Yeah, I mean, I think I've talked to some folks about it. Our model doesn't take advantage of the tax credit, so we're gonna, still do our thing. But I think in general, I think that the industry is really wants to keep it, and they're gonna fight and lobby to keep the 30% tax credit. And there's a chance that it'll be there's some shaky again. So in the event that it doesn't pass, that it gets dropped, I think the costs of the industry are dropping so fast that the industry will survive, the industry will grow. And in fact, it might even be beneficial because it takes out a whole amount of sort of paperwork and legal boondoggle that is currently involved in third-party financing. So it could be a benefit, but I think most folks would agree that they would like it to stay. I don't know if anybody else wants to.
Tina?
An unloaded question. I was curious if you guys could just talk about, from whatever perspectives or hearsay that you have around the role of solar in public infrastructure, particularly around transportation. I went to a transportation green conference thing in Rome City back in 2008, and they were saying that Caltrain's goal was to be fully electrified by 2014. I don't think that's happened. I think Caltrain since the 90s, but it seems like it sounds the same as it did then.
I don't think it's even electric at all.
And I'm just curious if there's local power generation plan for stations, same thing for BART. I know BART obviously is electrified, but just curious if there's any traction there. And obviously there's community centers and all kinds of ways to look at the solar problem, but I just think transportation is such a huge thing, especially as the Bay Area becomes more congested and more nightmarish to live in. These run things.
I think we'll get to electric self-driving cars sooner than we get to solar Caltrain.
It's got to be included. I don't have any forecast for you. I don't know about BART or Caltrans, but through AB 2514, utilities do have to have by 2020 1.3 was, I think, 1.3 gigawatts of storage. So solar paired with storage could facilitate that growth. I think storage is really important to have available for transportation systems because renewable energy is intermittent. So I think the best solution in my mind would be to definitely pair it with storage, any renewable for purposes of transportation. And I would imagine that would go into the mix, but I don't know about the local transportation.
Well, I promised you, and then we'll go with you, and then we'll go for quick answer mode. But
okay.
First.
So this is for Brian. It's not a hostile question. So in Hawaii, where they have a high penetration, they've been having problems. And I think my numbers may not be exactly right, but in 2013, they had $400 million worth of installations. 2014, they had half of that because of backups, because of problems on the grid. And they did some firmware upgrades on the microinverters and are supposedly going to address that. Are you seeing similar problems here in California? And what kind of problems is distributed generation causing for the grid technologically?
So I'm not seeing those problems. I think Hawaii had its own suite of issues. We're seeing growth and more growth, lots of interconnections. In terms of the technology, that's a really good question, and I would have to connect you to my team in the interconnection group because they're innovating, and it's real time. I mean, these things are happening. We're trying to adapt and change with the industry, and there are moving targets out there. It's but to my knowledge, there are no distinct roadblocks happening right now. But yeah, I would be smart to connect you to the people in interconnection that could probably better answer your question because they're the ones that actually review and
anyone in solar, it's always like grid parity, meaning when the cost of solar is the same as traditional energy. And what I'm really curious about, this is accelerating the solar revolution. Another revolution that's happening right now is fracking and like collapse of gas prices. And around the country, it's a mix of gas and electricity. It's specific gas and electric. So it depends on how much households are using electricity versus gas. But I'm wondering in terms of like macroeconomic picture, what, if any, conversations in terms of projections and threat from the collapse of price are you having with this other revolution that's happening right now in the U.S. and what's being talked about, and is that significantly altering projections and investment, investor comfort in solar?
Good question. you guys are saying that it's still accelerating like crazy, but what impact has fracking and so on had?
Wow, another good question. So I can, yeah, I mean, that's a really hard question to answer. I'll say that it's with the prices of gas and the fact that we do get a lot of energy from our gas resources. Investing in gas power is tricky because you have to look down the road at the useful life of the device that you're installing, and are you running the risk of a stranded asset, and there's some risk there. So and will that asset 5 years from now be dirtier than the allowable mix by the CPUC? So and then does that put increased or decreased pressure on frackers or fracking resources? So I mean that's just a super hard question to look.
Is that coming up in PG&E in your conference room?
Yeah.
Like, oh crap, there's this thing is happening. Like, is that like, oh, that's over there, we're not really discussing
No,
that?
absolutely no. So we have a group called Energy Procurement, and that's basically what they do. They look down the road and they look at prices and they look at risk and resources and they play in that space, and the people that I've met in that group fiercely smart, and they make those projections, but that's a different conversation than what I have on a daily basis.
I'll just add one, I guess two minor things to that. One is that first of all, there's a huge political backlash that's growing against fracking. So New York State just banned fracking, which is awesome, and that's going to be increasingly happening, which also affects investors' decisions. I think the bigger point around fracking is that when you frack, and this is my basic understanding of it, is that you get a huge boost of gas right away, but that once that's gone, that sort of that area that you've tapped is not going to be producing at that same amount. So right now we're experiencing a boom of natural gas, but it's going to be short-lived. In general, the difference between solar and fossil fuels and natural gas in particular, but in general fossil fuels, is that the fossil fuel economy is about taking a finite amount of resources and we're going into harder to get places, which costs more money, and it's having more of an effect on the community to extract those fossil fuels. And there's a growing demand for them, so the price keeps going up. Solar is the opposite. Solar is a technology, which means the more demand there is for it, the costs keep dropping, right? We've developed the technology further and further. So the technology is getting better and better and cheaper, whereas natural gas and other fossil fuels is reaching that point where it's getting more and more expensive over time as the resources dry up. So we're really at that tipping point right now. And as the EIA pointed out, and this is not a clean energy focused organization, that by 2050 it's definitely going to be the majority of energy in the world is going to be powered by PV. So I think the economies of the world are starting to realize this fact that we're at this tipping point, the difference between an extractive resource versus a technology.
Right. It's just the graphs right now, at least in the immediate term, are not following the modeling, right?
Right. In the short term, there's this mirage that, there's going to be this ton of cheap natural gas, but like I said, it's a short bubble, but it's not going to last for very long.
And at least it may accelerate the de-adoption of coal, perhaps. You had a question, and then you, and who else has a question? Okay, that's about what we have time for. Anyone else?
Does anybody want to hear?
Just help yourself with plenty of beer. So let's go.
Really quick, just to build on that, we talked about cultural barriers earlier. Is it really about the economics alone? When people see the math, business, individual households, what have you, they know what decision to make.
Right.
Kind of values aside somewhat, because we're talking about mainstream adoption.
Yeah, so I mean, briefly, just from our challenge, we saw one of the top ideas was around using events at a community level to help those people that are already solar adopters tell their story. And the idea was 5 houses up, 5 houses down. It's just if you can have an impact to your neighbors, and how can you leverage the solar clients or solar users to become solar ambassadors? What kind of impact can that have? Because definitely in a lot of places the economics are so great, but it's just an awareness and understanding and a trust, and all the information might get online or whatever resource. won't be nearly as convincing as actually talking to people and talking to your neighbors.
So you would say that it's still an issue, this cultural barrier that seems to be out there. That's still, you've seen that yourself?
I think so. I mean, I think yeah, to the point that Jason's making is that solar is contagious. So study after study shows that when someone goes solar and then their neighbor goes solar, that the neighbor after that is going to go solar faster than the neighbor before them, and so on and so forth, and it grows in this rapid way. So to us, what Revolve is really trying to do is, as I mentioned, we're financing groups that typically can't find financing, so that's its own right, that's its own service. But then but it also happens to work out that these are the community centers where people go to church, where they go to school, where they're a part of the community, so that when they see, oh, my local school, my local church went solar, that then they're more interested in checking it out for themselves. And I think that is a huge issue. I mean, I've talked to solar installers who, there's still a perception generally. I think it's changing, but I think there's still a general perception that solar is for. I heard a solar installer say, hippies with sandals and candles, right? And it's like, there's this concept of like, oh, it's just for the green guy, or it's just for the environmentalist, or it's just for the rich people. These are a lot of misconceptions, a lot of myths. And actually, one of the things that Revolve does is when we work with the community, we have these solar education events, and we give a talk on, and we go through Mythbusters, and there's a ton of them, right? It's only for rich people. The technology's not there yet. It's not cost effective, and it's only for these kind of people, and that's all false. And people don't know that. And the more that we can get out there and get it on the roof, the more people see it, the more they'll start to see solar as the new normal.
So I'll tag onto that and just say that it's totally contagious. I completely agree. And we've done a lot of market research on our customers and who go solar. And a lot of the customers are, the greener customers, the people who are more environmentally focused. And they do spread the word really well. But I think the trigger point is when you can inform people that it actually does make economic sense. Yes. So even though you might have strong environmental values, you're green or you're hippie or whatever, but once you get over that financial barrier or just understand that it actually can have really good economic impact on you, that's when people pull the trigger.
I just want to say that I work with solar integrators, and when there's one house that has solar, the other house that has solar and they have no electric bill, and the guy next door is paying $2,000 a year on electricity. Interesting conversations ensue. So this question is for Brian about AB 2514. Do you think that the economics of storage are there? I mean, my understanding that it kind of isn't, and it isn't going to be for a long time.
Tesla thinks it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of money being invested in state and batteries.
Right.
There are lots of Solar City
consumers.
Solar City is currently selling a battery under a 5 kilowatt battery paired with solar. We have a lot of applications in my program for that product. I don't think that one pencils out really well, and I don't think the numbers would support that business model of the smaller battery yet. But if you look at the economics of a project, maybe 200 kilowatt project to reduce demand charges on a commercial customer, where their demand goes like that, but you have a battery now that towards the middle of the day it just drops down, and that pencils out. So lithium ion batteries, to meet your customer demand during peak, as long as, and the way I've understood it is, as long as the price for your levelized cost of energy is lower than 3 times your peak, which includes your demand, then that's about where you want to be. That'll be a payback that works out favorably for you. But you have to run those numbers, and you have to understand your capacity factors, so how much you're running per year. Those are all issues that you have to tackle economically, but I think that lithium ion batteries at that level work.
So basically, for people who have demand charges.
Yeah, commercial customers. Yeah. Okay. Should we wrap it up?
Super quick question about Revolve models, actually addressed it in a big way. Thanks to the question. I'm curious, is your model proactive or more reactive? Like, are you taking applications for to join a crowdfunding model from these community centers, or are you looking at data or the heat map of where solar is being installed in a big way and not, and then going into these communities and trying to get these community centers in high need areas to join on?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a proactive model. So we go out into the community and we try to find nonprofits and cooperatives that we can work with that are interested in going solar with us. And in fact, to expand that outside of the Bay Area, what we launched this year is our program called the Solar Ambassador Program, where we've been training college students in remotely through the web, through webinars every 2 weeks in Maine, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Colorado, and California. We're training these college students through a year-long internship program to go out into their community and either potentially put solar up on a building on their campus or a nonprofit or co-op in their community. We're teaching them, about solar finance and solar policy, and how it is that they can, and then actually now we're sort of bringing this whole career aspect into it so that when they graduate, they can get into the solar industry. But it's definitely a proactive model, and we're trying to make this a national movement, as quickly as possible.
Do the recipients become ambassadors?
Do the recipients,
as in, so the community centers, do you provide tools or ways for them to start spreading the word?
We do, yeah. So we, as I mentioned, the communities that we work with, we have regular solar education events. Even after we've done the installation, we'll go back and have a solar education event. We currently partner with Sungevity because we don't do residential installations, but Sungevity does. We bring a Sungevity rep to our solar education events, and we invite the community and we provide food and snacks, and we go through these myths. But then we also have the Sungevity rep talk about how people can get a free quote to go solar and save money at home. And a lot of people are signing up and going solar in that way. So we definitely are. And then, we just got our last project, the Kahila Community Synagogue, executive director there just put me in touch with another nonprofit in the Bay Area. And so hopefully that project will come through. So they're definitely helping to spread the word as well.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us. A quick round of applause for our panel. We'll be hanging out for just a wee bit. You're more than welcome to grab another beer and hang. A quick announcement and a thanks to the Hub for hosting us. Next month, 25th?
Yeah.
March 25th, we've got a particularly interesting topic. We're going to be talking about sustainability in the supply chain of marijuana. So this is going to be a really interesting one. We are only serving beer, and it's going to be in the San Francisco Hub. You can RSVP. Just go to tripleplanet.com. You'll see it in the sidebar, and we hope to see you next month. Thanks so much.
Awesome.